Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation podcast, where we discuss the exciting innovations that lie ahead for organizational ground transportation. Each episode, we cover topics tailored to those resolving transportation-related challenges and provide tips, tools, and trends that will inspire you to stay ahead of the curve. And now, here's your host, Daniel Perez.
Welcome to the Future of Ground Transportation. Today we have a special guest, Greg Moran with Zoomcar. Greg, thank you for joining the show tonight.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
Perfect. So Greg, let's get to the bottom of it. Tell us how you got into the sector. Tell us a little bit about your history.
Sure. Yeah, it's been a pretty, unconventional journey for me. So I actually was born and raised in New York. I was down at University of Pennsylvania for my undergrad, and coming out of school, I worked for 5 years on Wall Street. That was maybe a little bit more conventional, but was really laser focused on emerging markets. And so was really working in India, Southeast Asia, Africa. Those markets were kind of the core focus at the intersection of emerging markets and sustainability, clean tech. After a few years, I realized I wanted to do something on my own within consumer tech, and saw the massive wave happening in the early part of last decade. And so I wanted to be a part of that and kind of really coalesce those interests and do something on my own. And that's where the idea of Zoomcar and urban ground mobility came from, and trying to do something initially in India and take that and expand that to the broader emerging markets.
That is awesome. So tell us a little bit about Zoomcar and what is the main objective of Zoomcar and the value that you guys are going to be bringing into the marketplace.
Sure. So with Zoomcar, we're effectively looking to solve the broader problem statement of car sharing, car rental in emerging markets. So markets like India, markets like broader Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America. So these markets that are relatively new in the game with respect to these sort of newer digitized types of ground mobility. And that is something which we felt we would have the opportunity as an early mover to create this really dynamic two-sided marketplace. So effectively, we're kind of akin to what you see with Airbnb or Turo, but very laser focused in our markets. And so we've built very customized product solutions ground up for our guests and our hosts who actually own the vehicles. So really it's a very consumer-centric technology product-focused platform.
Awesome. And Greg, who's going to be owning the vehicles? Is Zoomcar going to be owning the vehicles, or is the consumer going to be owning the vehicles? What is the business model?
Yeah, so the model, it's a pure peer-to-peer marketplace. So Zoomcar ourselves, we don't own vehicles as such. It's the individual vehicle owner hosts. So it's the individual hosts that actually own the vehicles. And so we have actually many now micro entrepreneurs on the platform who own many. So not just one vehicle, but they might own 3, 5, 7, 10 vehicles. And so that's growing as an overall part of the mix.
That is awesome. And are you guys operating in the U.S. too, or is it mainly going to be in emerging markets?
So we're not in the U.S. We are in India, Indonesia, and Egypt today, but we're looking out actively in Latin America, broader Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia. And I think the product that we built is really laser tailor-made focused for emerging markets. So I think it's fairly unlikely that we would go into the U.S. or Europe, and partially just given the competition and the dynamics there, I think what we've built out is for our markets.
Got it. Thank you, Greg. And how will you guys differentiate between Uber and Lyft? Like, what would be the difference?
Sure. I mean, I think if you look at ride hailing versus car sharing, you have kind of a fundamentally different use case there. So ride hailing is typically going to be like 5, 10, 15, 20 miles. It's going to be 30 minutes, an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So very, very short, tight trips, many times, to and from airports or around the city. So you don't have really those longer or longer duration. So we have anything from a half a day on the low end all the way to 4, 5, 6 days on the high end, and everything in between. So, and it's hundreds of miles actually, typically. So you have a very different sort of use case and travel requirement. And so in our markets, you have Uber and local competitors similar to Uber and ride hailing, but we very much kind of come together to form a broader transport fabric. So it's not in any way competing. In fact, it's actually complementary that way.
Got it. Thank you, Greg. And are you guys privately owned? Is it private equity, venture capital? and give us a little bit of context?
So we actually recently successfully completed a de-SPAC transaction on the NASDAQ. So we have been publicly trading under the Zcar ticker. So the Zcar ticker has been now live since the end of December. That's when we completed our de-SPAC. So it's been almost 2 months on the NASDAQ.
Awesome. And why the emerging markets? You guys see better opportunities there, where in South America and all these other emerging markets, there's not that business model that we see here traditionally in the States and in Europe?
That's right. I mean, I think what's interesting is if you kind of take a step back and look at the anatomy of the market. So whether it's India, Indonesia, markets like Brazil, Nigeria, all these markets. So you have materially lower rates of car ownership relative to the US, Canada, Europe, etc. So where in the US and Europe, you see 80% plus, sometimes 90% car ownership rates. In the markets that we operate in, it's like 10, 15% as a standard car ownership rate across the populace in the urban cities. And so I think that's what makes it exciting, because you have the use cases that are there are far more broad. So you have the need to use a service like Zoomcar once or twice a month rather than once or twice per year. And that's really, in our view, very compelling in terms of the overall profitability potential at a user level and the ability to generate just more frequency and more transactions. So that's what gets us very excited. And the fact that our markets also are not really particularly competitive. So we're first movers, first to scale. We enjoy 95% market share in the online digital space. Whereas if you look in the US and in Europe, you have 10, 15 big players. So it's a very different game. So for us, it's like long tail, offline, unstructured mom and pop players that would be termed as competition. So it's a different ecosystem.
Got it. Thanks, Greg. And as you guys enter into these emerging markets, what obstacles and challenges will you foresee that will be from the highest to lowest?
Well, I think certainly one of the big challenges is that in emerging markets, you have consumers who are still very, very demanding, but they don't have the wallet share capacity that you would have in Western markets, right? So you have certainly a strong intent and willingness to do something, and you're very demanding, but they don't always have the means. And so you kind of have to bridge that. So the economic means question is usually not a question in the US or Europe or Australia, these type of markets. But in markets like India, markets like Nigeria, Indonesia, Brazil, these are questions that come up quite a bit. So you have to really have a higher bar of kind of product excellence in terms of that experience. And you need to find other ways to kind of bring value and think about value, not just in the context of absolute price, but in other sort of parameters, other features, other enhancements that you might bring to the service, to the product. So that's the big one. And I would say when you look at the second sort of overarching pillar is that you don't have the same financial infrastructure with regards to consumer payments. And so the robustness of online payments is a little bit different in the markets that we transact in. So payments are now broadly digitized, but you have different sort of backbone there, and so different solutions that are not necessarily as streamlined as they are in the Western market. So I think these are some of the elements that you kind of work towards and battle through.
Got it. Very well said. Appreciate you sharing that. And let's talk a little bit about sustainability. I know that you're a huge believer into sustainability. How do you foresee sustainability within Zoomcar?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the core ethoses for Zoomcar. And you guys mentioned there in the onset, for starting the company, that was one of the big founding mission statement tenets for the platform right from the very beginning. So for us, I think what that means is really kind of consistently building out more and more electric vehicle capabilities for the platform. And that means getting more and more electric hosts onto the platform. So individual vehicle owners who own electric. And I think what's interesting is the economic proposition for electric vehicle owners for hosts on the platform is extremely robust, because you have the ability to price something materially higher, call it 50% plus higher than a typical ICE engine car because of the scarcity and the novelty of it. And in markets like India, Indonesia, you don't have, for instance, you don't have brands like Tesla or Rivian. They're not in the market. So you don't have that same penetration with regards to electric cars. It's still early days. So, if you're kind of on the front lines of that, there's a real opportunity in terms of value creation for the guest. And then for the host, they have the chance to make a lot more money on that. And so there's this great matching opportunity where you're tapping in this demand scarcity on that side with the host on the other side. So that's going to be the big pillar for us, and having different partnerships on electric vehicle infrastructure and trying to make it more streamlined for hosts and guests.
Got it. And Greg, this will be sort of a program where you guys partner, as you mentioned, with other manufacturing companies providing electrical vehicles, where you guys could subsidize it or something along those lines, or is it mainly with vehicle owners that have the electrical vehicles?
So it's primarily the latter there with folks that have the vehicles, but yeah, I think we're very open and certainly we're willing to make some investments there, and we have deep partnerships with not just kind of OEMs, but also secondhand vehicle marketplace platforms. So in the US you have people like Carvana and others, but in India you have different players like Cars24 and others where we have strong relationships, and we've talked about that out there in the open recently. And I think ultimately it's about really building an ecosystem of kind of OEM partners, financing partners, insurance related partners, maintenance related partners for vehicle owners, for hosts. So you're allowing them and really enabling them to better sort of monetize and better run their businesses, their small businesses with us.
Got it, Greg. Thank you. And when it comes to security and user experience, especially in emerging markets, I'm assuming that this could be one of the challenges that you guys are facing, or like, how are you guys looking to navigate those ropes as you guys enter this market?
Sure. Well, I think as we move into new markets, I think for us, we really want to just, I think, be really laser focused on the consumer experience of the product. And so I think what we've tried to build out here in India is highly replicable across Indonesia, across Egypt, and many other markets as we go into Latin America and other places. So I think the key for us is going to be to kind of really take that core platform and then kind of calibrate that last sort of 15-20%, which is going to make it a little bit more kind of local flair, more oriented towards some of the preferences and centricities there of the local consumer in that market. So, call it, take Southeast Asia, Latin America, any example there. But I think it's going to be kind of that 80-20 rule of, I think getting that balance right is something which you kind of have to calibrate. And you really need to have the right team locally in place in new markets. So that's a big focus as well. So it's both kind of about fine tuning, calibrating the product, and having the right mix of local folks who are just really immersed in that geography, in that market, and that consumer base. So, I mean, you can't go to a big country like, say, Brazil, for instance, without having a strong team in Sao Paulo or Rio or wherever.
Got it. And Greg, who will be your ideal clients? Is it Fortune 1000? Is it more B2C on the consumer side?
Yeah, so we are really B2C kind of at their core. So we're not really an enterprise solutions player. So when it comes to folks using the platform and the service as guests, as renters, it is really direct to the consumer. And so, it's like, just people like us who need, they have travel requirements, whether it's for leisure, for work, whatever. And, whether you live in the city or you're traveling into that city, we have flexibility, airports, railway stations. You have flexibility in terms of getting the car delivered, getting it not delivered, but then all of these different options are available to you. And that way it goes direct to the consumer. And we believe that's the easiest and best path to scale.
That is awesome. And Greg, here in this show, we normally talk about the future of transportation, and especially between flying vehicles, autonomous vehicles, self-drive vehicles. What is your perspective, if you had a crystal ball, between the autonomous vehicles, self-drive vehicles, and flying vehicles, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years, and how is the correlation going to either benefit or affect Zoomcar?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think there's a lot there we can unpack for some time, but I would say, for us, it might not affect as much in the near to medium term, just because we operate in markets that are a little bit further away from some of what I'll call like the bleeding edge technologies around mobility. So if you think about emerging markets like India, Indonesia, other places in Africa, Latin America, so these are very sort of development oriented in terms of the labor markets as well. So meaning that a lot of the newer age startups and a lot of the new businesses that are getting built out, the actual kind of industrial policy behind it, if you will, from the government is all about, okay, how this can be like a major jobs creator and jobs driver. So many of these countries, there's jobs deficits, and actually all of these countries, there's meaningful jobs deficits because you have very young populations that are in their early mid-20s on average, and you need to create tons of jobs. And so the government looks at a lot of these new mobility and new sort of startups that are kind of creating this technology, and looking at it from a jobs lens. And so I think whenever we then fast forward and think about electric, think about autonomous, think about something that would be like flying taxi, etc. Well, those of course, the flying side would intersect with electric and autonomous. But I think you have this broader question of jobs and the effect on jobs in emerging markets. Now, you could have a broader topic on that, with AI for Western markets, but I think there's a general reticence and reluctance on the part of a lot of the markets and the countries, the governments that we operate in, to aggressively propagate that sort of technology if it means sort of near to medium term job displacement. So I would say in the next 5 to 10 years, I would be very surprised if you saw any sort of meaningful penetration of autonomous or flying anything in our markets. I think electric will come first, and electric is actually coming first, not in cars, but in two-wheelers like motorbike scooters, and three-wheelers like electric tuk-tuks and rickshaws, as well as buses. So cars are actually lagging. If you look at broader South Asia, Southeast Asia, Africa, MENA, the emerging parts there, and Latin America, it's actually cars are way behind what you would see in US, Europe, or China. So it's actually electric buses, electric two-wheelers, electric three-wheelers. So it's a different arc of development. I mean, you're seeing electric cars obviously come into these markets, but it's at a slower cadence. And it's because of cost. It's because of the cost.
Totally. I totally agree. Couldn't say better. Especially for us when it comes to implementing sustainability programs with electrical vehicles, the cost is normally carried by the clients, and when we provide a proposal, the price is normally 100% higher, and it just gets pretty hairy to implement it due to the cost. But I'm sure that in the next 3 to 5 years, it will be more feasible and affordable to Fortune 1000 companies to implement it.
Right.
With that being said, what is the best business advice, Greg, that you ever receive of that has resonated the most with you?
So in terms of the best business advice, I would probably have to say, though, it's more kind of leadership based advice and team advice. And that's been more from a coaching lens, but I think it's really about coming down to empathy and really sort of demonstrating that you really need to be kind of always on the front lines when it comes to leading and leaning in from an empathy standpoint, with all of your kind of L1, L2s, and showing that you're kind of right there on the front lines with them, sort of really like sort of taking the maximum sort of pain, and you're kind of really in it with them, as opposed to kind of leading from afar, and so really being sort of focused and hands-on from an empathetic standpoint. So it's sort of that notion of like leaders eating last, which I think really resonates, where you have to kind of walk the walk, and you can't just be kind of talking the talk there. And so you have to be prepared to kind of roll up your sleeves and be there with the team as needed, and not just kind of be in that sort of ivory tower. So you need to have folks really resonate with you along the way, and then kind of at the same time, there's this really important need to have a really strong listening ability and context there along with that. And so I think those two kind of go hand in hand. So I would say, that's been, pretty consistent and early on. And I think that came in from some investors, some other entrepreneurs. And I think that always, I think, really stuck, I would say.
Awesome. Thank you. And for all the listeners, we have a ton of entrepreneurs, obviously, tons of business executives and business owners. What is the best business books that you normally relied on, or that has, again, impacted your life the most? Life?
Sure. Well, I actually think that one of the really interesting books that I had read with regards to entrepreneurship was actually from Ben Horowitz. And so the hard thing about hard things, I think that's a pretty popular book, I think, overall, I believe. But that really, really resonated for me in many, many ways. Because I think he was also, I think what's interesting about Ben Horowitz is that he's a really celebrated entrepreneur, but also an incredible investor. And so he has a way of kind of crafting that story and that narrative. And I thought that there's just almost every chapter there you can really relate to and resonate with.
Totally agree. I love that book. Perfect. Sounds good. So Greg, how can we, for all the listeners, how can they hear more about Zoomcar? Are you guys taking investments? How can this community serve you guys along the journey?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we are a publicly traded company. We're at Zcar is our ticker, and you can certainly visit our website. And if you're in our markets, you can download the app, and of course, check out the service and the product. And I think definitely it's something where we see a huge market opportunity. We believe we're meaningfully below 1% penetrated against what ultimately is out there as an opportunity here. So we see significant growth over the next several years, and we're just building this thing for the long term.
That's awesome. Hey, Greg, thank you again for being part of tonight's episode. I wanted to thank everyone for being part of the show tonight. Stay tuned with the next guest, and have a great night. Thank you, Greg.
All right, thanks so much, Daniel. All right, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the future of ground transportation. We appreciate you coming along for the ride. If you found value in this episode and want to hear more, please make sure to subscribe to the show.